Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my channel. So in this very video, we want to talk about the pathway or stages of an addiction. So an addiction ranges from one level to the next. So we'll actually talk about them on this very video, and we'll range them into 10 different stages. All right. So the first one has to do with the initiation phase. All right. This is where the individual is trying out the substance or the behavior for the very first time, and then often due to curiosity, peer pressure, or stress can be the reason why this individual started it. So the next one has to do with experimentation. So this is the point where the individual continuously want to use it to either overcome the stress of the day or because of the peer influence on that very individual. So, or because of curiosity, you just want to get that very excitement. So this is the experimental phase, just experimenting it to see what that substance can do to him or her. Yes. So it's actually that very point where that individual is exploring it for effects or potential benefits. We call this very phase experimentation. Here, the individual will move on to the regular use, where the individual is not just using it because he wants to get the effect or wants to get the benefit. It's because the individual, the body is starting to crave little by little for this very substance. So the individual now establish a regular pattern of use, which is just to help him cope with the same stress, the same emotion or daily life need that led him to initiate it or to experiment it. From there, we'll now move to the fourth one, which has to do with tolerance. This is the point where the dose or quantity of that substance, there is a need to step up on it. Yes. So it is that point where there is an increasing need for an amount to achieve the same effect as the body adapts to the substance. So as you continuously take that substance, your body get adjusted to it because the substance is foreign. So the body get adjusted to it to the point where it becomes normal, where a particular dose no longer cause any effect or that benefit you were looking for to that body. So there will be need to step up. We call this very stage tolerance. From there, we'll move on to the stage of dependence. In this stage of dependence, if you have followed our previous video where we talked about the concept of an addiction, we talked about dependence, where the individual physically and psychologically depend on this substance to actually function or rely on the substance to function. So this is the point where the individual is experiencing physical or psychological withdrawal symptoms when trying to stop or reduce the use of this substance. So at this point, from that point of tolerance, there's some negative effects that the individual is not okay with, and the individual may have that desire to either reduce the dose or wants to quit. Hence, there will be some bodily reaction or psychological reactions. Because of this, the individual will not be able to function normally, physically or psychologically. And at this point, we say dependence have set in. Then that will take us to the next stage, which is the addiction stage. Now, this is the point where the individual have lost control. It is a compulsive, repetitive, continuous pattern of the use of this substance in the face of adverse effect. That point where there is an issue, an imminent issue, but the individual will continuously use it because his body is already dependent on it, his mind is already dependent on it, and there is that tolerance already that have set in. So an addiction phase is that point where you lose control over the use, and despite negative consequence and feeling, you are unable to stop or cut down. That is what an addiction. And what we need to know in substance use is that in the beginning, you control it. Up to the point of tolerance, you can still control the use of a substance. But beyond tolerance, when dependence have set in, it is not easy. At that point, we say the substance controls the individual. Yes. So if you have watched this video to this very point, Let me know what you have just heard in the comment box. So we just talked about tolerance, dependence, and addiction. And we say that in the beginning, you control the use of your substance, even up to the point of tolerance. But when dependence have set in, which will lead into the road that starts for an addiction, at that point, the substance controls the individual. So will now lead us to the next phase, which is the escalation phase, which has to do with increasing use, frequent use, or intensity, often leading to more severe consequences. At this point, the body wants you to cut down. Your mind wants you to cut down. But the function of your body, the function of your mind cannot be effective in the absence of this very substance. So there is that competition, there is that fight. Now, because dependence have set in, addiction have set in, you can no longer do without it. There's that compulsion to use it. At this point, you would want to continuously use it. You want to use it again. And this will lead to a very frequent use of that substance and a more intense consequence, or the need for increasing use of that very substance. We say at this point, escalation, you are at the escalation stage. Then that leads us to the next stage, which is the maintenance, which has to do with continuing the use. You continuously use to avoid withdrawal, to also maintain a sense of normalcy or cope with life. So in this point of maintenance, we see that in the absence of that substance, the individual totally cannot do anything. It cannot function well, both physically, psychologically, and otherwise. So for him to look like everything is normal, which is where most persons struggle with, is this point of maintenance that most persons struggle with. At this point of maintenance, we recommend a full-time inpatient rehabilitation. Because for an individual to function normally, he or she would need to take this very substance. Then we'll have the point of relapse. In this stage, this is where the individual have actually tried to quit on his own or is an inpatient care. But after a while, after discharge or after a while attempting to quit it, he returns back to the use of that substance. So, which may be due to either the triggers, there are what we call triggers, I'll talk about in a different video, or stress or cravings, which I also talk about in a different video. They are actually present. So this would lead to the individual returning back to the use of that substance. That will now lead us to what we have, the chronic addiction. Chronic addiction stage now sets in where there is that prolonged use of this substance. So it's a long-term repeated cycle of addiction with worsening consequences and decreased ability to control the use. It is worthy of note that this pathway can vary in length, in speed, and then in severity. And not everyone will progress through all the stages. Some persons might move from one point up to a higher stage of substance addiction, while some will return back. Hence, they can even quit. So that is worthy of note for us to actually observe. So understanding this pathway can actually help individual and professional address addiction and then support our recovery. So if you have someone that is actually suffering from one of these stages we have mentioned, you have actually seen it, or you want to know about how to identify each of these stages, let me know in the comment box. I'm also going to make a separate video on how to identify substance users. So if you have watched up to this point, I want to especially appreciate you. I look forward to always having you on this very channel, and where this very channel becomes your most favorite click. Thank you so much for always checking up. God bless you.